Welcome to What's the Point? A weekly discussion of truth, realities, challenges, theological and philosophical views, national policies, and international concerns. Welcome to What's the Point? Today we're going to be talking about another covert sin, which is anger. And so let's start off with just defining what it is. Dad, if you want to go ahead and start.
Okay. Anger actually is not exactly wrong totally. In other words, it depends what is the motive behind the anger. But generally, anger is an expression of disgust as a general thing, an expression of displeasure over something. So then you get angry because it does not meet your expectation. It does not meet standards. It's wrong in your view, and so you are angered by it. So the question there: what makes it wrong and what makes it right?
Right.
So if the reason for the anger is plainly selfish, for your own interest, it's your own misconception of what is right, but that may not be right for others, expectation that you made that may not be really the real expectations, or events that is supposed to be forgivable, but you are angered by it. So if your motive for being angry is something selfish or something, I should say, not within God's will, then that's, to me, wrong. But if you're angry over sin, I'm angry at sin. I'm angry about injustice. I'm angry about wrong policies of government. I'm angry about corruption. Then that is not wrong. You can be angry about those things. So if it's coming from rage, unforgiveness, coming from hate, prejudice, then that's when anger is wrong.
Okay. What do you think, Josh? What that kind of is a two-part question. What is anger? And then when does it, when is it, I guess, like good, or just a quick explanation on those two?
So, like that was saying, spot on with the aspect of anger. Not necessarily a bad thing if it's, for the right reasons. And because at the end of the day, an example would be like God was angry at certain points, but not that God was wrong, but he was actually right in his anger. But it's a matter of, like Dad was saying, what are you angry about and how do you respond to that? Because a lot of times too, you can be angry about the right thing, or maybe your response is not the best. And so
that's good. Yeah.
That can lead to something that, is not good. So we really have to check, not only your motives, but also how you deliver these things, to just people in general, because that's really important as well. So I think the other side is, thinking about like really assessing, hey, why am I angry? Am I angry for, the right reasons? If not, then I need to change that and help ask God to change that. But also to like more importantly, help God, teach me how to like respond to anger in the right way. I am angry about the right thing. So
yeah.
Well, I think when you're angry, it's best not to immediately express it. Take some time to think the reason for your anger. So I always say, not only for anger, but for other stuff as well, that you have to check your motive. You have to evaluate your action, but you have to think about the possible consequence of your action. So if it's really, if you really want to be sure that everything is okay, you have a right motive, you have the right action, and the consequence of it is something that is constructive instead of destructive. So in anger, that's particularly important. When somebody or something triggered your anger, I think you have to count at least 10 counts before you get angry. And while counting, you think, do I express this? Because it might be for the right motive. Because the question, if I express it, in what manner and what will be the consequence of this? You might be expressing it for the right reason, but the way, as Josh said, the way you say it will create more problems and consequences that instead of solving the problem, you actually made it worse. So that's the reason why there's a very fine line there, whether you will express it or not, because it doesn't mean that you're angry about it, that you can express it. Now, in the case of Jesus Christ, he was really angry about those people, the merchants in front of the temple. He turned the tables, the money lenders.
Yeah.
And if I believe if you look at the situation at the time, remember there were money lenders there and merchants because they were buying things to sacrifice to the temple. Remember in the Old Testament, you have to buy certain stuff, grain, doves, animals to sacrifice to the temple. That's supposed to be to come from your own farm or your own herd. And instead of doing that, they were just shortcutting it.
And you're buying it from like outside the temple.
Outside the temple. And those who have no money, they will have to borrow with interest with the money lenders. So what was supposed to be a real sacrifice for sin has become a business for other people. And that was what angered Jesus Christ. And to prove the point, he turned the tables. And he said, my house is a house of prayer, a house of purity, not a house of what is cheating and the like. So, but that expression does not mean it's always the case. Other people who express their anger easily, forgetting the consequence, always quote this action of Jesus Christ. Well, Jesus Christ turned tables. But remember, he only did that once in 33 years. So
because he wanted to prove a point that like it was ruining the definition of what people were going to the temple for.
Yeah. If you notice, Jesus also was angry with the Pharisees, the religious elite of those times. But he did not necessarily shout at them and hit them in the face because they were hypocrites. But he spoke strongly about them. Bird of vipers, snakes, and lights. So that was an expression of anger in the
but he was not
context.
I guess
he was teaching when he was doing that.
Being angry, then what you're saying is being angry does not really equate to lashing out, because a lot of people equate, oh, you're angry into lashing out, because those are two different actions.
You can be angry inside but decide to just keep quiet, but you're angry by it. So you have to think, if I lash it out, what will be the consequence of this? Will it be productive or it will be further destructive? So why do it in the first place? I would just constructively be silent and do it some other time.
I think for me, it's simple. Like, the practice of it is really difficult and it's a skill to be learned, but the, solution is simple. Like, try to be mindful, I think, of whenever you feel a certain way or whenever you feel kind of angry or you start to feel that tension build up. I think the best way to do it is like, because each scenario is different, so it's hard to put like a concrete way of doing it. But what works, and I think for everybody it would work, is to really like assess it, like, and at that moment, like, just pray to God in your mind and say, hey, like, what's the best way to handle this? Because that way it'll be, because each scenario is different, and Jesus handled his anger in different ways all the time. And so I think that goes along with, like, since it's not as concrete as it is, that means that you have to just really trust in, God's voice at the time, and trust like the practice that you put in reading your Bible and thinking about different like scenarios to know kind of how to handle the situation. So an example is this. So like for golf, right? The more you practice, the more you can know each situation when you're in a bad place. Meaning, if you hit it out of the fairway, there's different types of lies that you get depending on the ball. So for example, if the ball goes to a certain type of grass, and if the grass is pointing forward or back, it can alter the flight of the ball.
Okay.
But you don't really know that if you haven't played golf a lot. So you don't know how the ball's gonna come out, or you don't know how the ball's gonna react. It's the same thing. It's learned over time. It's the same thing with handling anger, or handling how to respond to anger. You know it's gonna come, but the aspect of like how do you like, because you have so much experience in it, like how do you then like decipher what to do? So then for me, putting in the practice playing golf, same thing as putting in the practice of reading the Bible and praying, it becomes easier to handle anger and know what to do, because you have so much experience of being angry, but at the same time, like now practicing thinking about, hey, what's the right course of action based on like X, Y, Z situations.
Yeah, I think it's also when you guys were talking about like how to handle it, and Josh, you brought up a good point when you said, oh God, if you're angry, like ask God, how should I handle this? Because also when you do that, say you're like really pissed off, and then you just like stop for a second and ask, hey God, how do I handle this? Acknowledging that you need to talk to God first about it, it kind of like gets you a little bit more calm, so you could like think better. And I know, and I'm sure the enemy would try to use that vulnerable space of you being angry to try to like say, oh yeah, like you should lash out right now. But I think it also comes with what you said, experience and like a good relationship with God to know that this is not how I'm supposed to act right now. And like you could kind of discern which voice to listen to. Because I'm sure the enemy will attack you during that time.
I will say this, the cheat code in it is you have to read your Bible, because then it becomes a whole different ball game when, because sometimes we're at the moment, right? It's silent, so you don't know. So there's no voice. But then the word of God is his voice. So that's why you have to get really into it, because then now you can start to see, as I get angry, I start to see different stories kind of pop up in my mind. I'm a visual person, so I see different stories. Right. Like which story pertains to my situation right now? And what they do. You know, so like similar to like if I'm watching a YouTube video of, you know, Rory McIlroy, like I know what he's doing here, and I've studied that, and that's why I'm able to decipher like how the ball's gonna fly and all these things. It's the same thing. Like that's the reason why, honestly, you know, the enemy doesn't want people to read the Bible, because he knows that's the sword that's gonna ultimately cut his head off. That's the reality of it. So he's gonna say like distract you all these different things so that you're not equipped when you are dealing with this situation, because you never knew the stories, you never put in the time to know how to equip yourself. Right. Then you blame God though. If I told you the solution is like listen to God at that moment, you can start to blame God when you don't hear him.
Yeah. But then God's like, you have the Bible 24/7 in your disposal.
Exactly. So that's what the cheat code is going to happen, because when you have the Bible and you understand it, like the concepts and the stories in it more and more, then that God's voice is in your mind intellectually, because you know how the stories are, and each one is designed to teach you something about how to handle a situation. So then when you don't hear that abstract, like still small voice that God is talking about, you have the plethora of like
stories and knowledge
that you can use.
Right, which is kind of interesting too, because, you know, if you were to, like you mentioned YouTube, a lot of people YouTube or Google everything. And I do the same thing. And like sometimes, like, let's just say not anger, but like just in general, how to, like, I don't know, if you were locked out of your car or whatever, right? And you're like, what am I doing in this situation? And you think of something that you've learned intellectually before. That's really important that you brought that up about how you could use the Bible in that scenario as well. And, you know,
it's very, very important if you do not get impulsive with your angry. So if you come down, try to open your Bible and pray, you will have a different expression of the anger that was supposed to be impulsively expressed. But to me, I think very key in handling, there's a course called anger management. The key there is remove the self in the anger formula. If you remove the self, your self-interest, because most of the people are angry, would like to assert, I am right. This is the way it should. I have to express it. My rights are being stepped on. I need to voice out. I need to take revenge. I need to lash out. In other words, it's all about self-preservation. It's all about self-assertion. Now, if you remove the self there and think that whatever you do, says Jesus, to the least of your brother, you're doing that to me. So if you shout at them, if whatever you do, you're doing that to Christ. So imagine for one moment that I will do this. So can you do what you are about to do to Jesus Christ himself? Because that's the same as shouting to Jesus Christ. When you berate someone, it's like berating Jesus Christ as well, because whatever you do to the least of your brother, you're doing it to me. So remember that whatever you do is as if you're doing that to the Lord. Now, then comes the real humility. You have to think, by me doing this, even if I'm right, because you can be right, but that does not give you the right to demean or berate or insult somebody because you're right. That's when humility can come. Okay, I am right, but I will keep it to myself, or I will express it in some other ways in the future. Because always think, okay, why are you angry? Why are you angry? Because you don't want this thing to happen again, or you don't want this kind of expression. So maybe you can postpone that when your emotions are down, and some later time when you are calm, you can just write a letter or call him. You know, yesterday I was very mad with you because you did this. I hope you will not do that again. But you are already very calm. You are just after the results that you will not do that again. And also him would have said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. And it's not explosive anymore because, it is past your. But if you did it at the time when he was also saying it in front of everybody, where there will be insults and there will be witnesses, sometimes self against self will bring explosion. So the element of self in the equation of anger management and anger expression is very critical. Removing self will make it far easier to handle anger.
I know I've heard before too that it's like you can't really fight fire with fire. So even if you think that like you have to say it now so that it can, you can get it out of your chest, but it goes back to self. You're doing it so that you can get it out of your chest. It has no and I learned this in a communications class actually in college, where when someone's like upset, right, or whatever, their walls, like their defenses, their walls are up. So you can keep yelling at them and they will not really hear you because they're already on a high alert and fight or flight response. So they're not really listening. So even if you have said it all, it went nowhere. So it's really better to wait until after, but it's very hard to do that. It's so easy to talk about it right now, but I'm sure I am guilty of that, of like lashing out and feeling like I have to say it right now. But when people's defenses are up, it's really, the conversation really doesn't get anywhere because no one's listening to you when they're also angry and then you're just like screaming.
See, this is the thing too. This is the thing I want to emphasize a lot. I think a lot of times, the premature like handling of anger. I think this is the human component of it. I think the reason why people respond really quickly to anger is because in their mind they're picturing a certain response back from the other person, and then but when they lash out or when they say that thing out of like anger without thinking about it, and they don't get the same response back, then they become even more mad. So that's that that becomes not so good is when somebody explains, or if you're angry at somebody then you lash out because you're thinking in your mind, okay, if I say this I'm really gonna shut them up or I'm really gonna do this, and the response is not that, you get even more angry. And I'll give you an example how that looks like for example, like I was at camp for the youth, and so teaching them these different things that they could do instead. So for example, if they see a brother or sister in Christ, if they see somebody making a mistake or like even make fun of them or make fun of somebody that they're correct in like wanting to correct them, they're correct in that righteous anger of saying, try to think about like ways to like not make that happen again. If they're teasing in a very derogatory way, or if they're saying something they shouldn't, the flesh tendency is to say shut up, like don't say that, which is like not it's not wrong to do. But the delivery there, I suggested to them, is delivery should be more. I like to keep it like clean, so it should be more like it's funny. All the time in the world will give us these solutions that actually aggravate it even more. So that the word like shut up and like all these different kind of things that the world teaches us is actually not the best way to shut them up.
Right, because if you say shut up, they're just gonna say no, you shut up, and then we're just
they're gonna say more. So it's funny when you say shut up, they're actually not gonna shut up.
No.
So the way to shut them up is simply this: it's to say, to take a step back, right? And you have to say it kind of calmly and not really cocky, but you say it out of humility, even when you're angry. I would say the most important thing is learn how to be humble in your anger. That's kind of a weird concept, but humble in anger, meaning take a step back and then say, instead of saying shut up to them, because you know you're right. So shut up is appropriate, like in the world standards, but it's not gonna help. What you should say instead of shut up is, hey, you really hurt me and you really hurt that person, there in a situation. Believe me, I've been there. That's me. I've realized in my own, so like you're still angry at them, but you're saying, look, I've realized in my own spirit that apart from Christ, I would be doing the same thing you are. But what I want to teach you is, what I want to tell you is, hey, like, just be mindful of like, what would Christ be doing what you just did? And if not, like, hey, I'm with you there, right? It took me such a long time to get to this point.
Right.
So instead of, that's the way to lift them up, because they're so confused. They're like, okay,
why?
He me. He made fun of himself, but then really like, that's actually how to shut them up, because they're so confused.
Because they're not going to be able to register it properly. Like, wait, and also you mentioned a really good thing there where you said like I statements, because I learned it in another communication class that like if you to handle like conflict, you don't say like you never do this or whatever. You don't say you because they didn't get defensive. You said it. You decided to come up with how you were and like you're in the same way, like you're like that too, and so then they could see like, wait, what? Like it's confusing when you talk to them that way. When you talk in a place
that you want to confuse them in that manner so that it takes them a long time to figure out what you just said, and by that process it shuts them up, but it also makes them introspective, and it even more, because that's what Jesus did. Oftentimes, if you look at it, the way he showed his anger was through a question. And it's true. You see it all the time.
And remember always to segregate the action from the actor with your anger. So you should, even in expressing it, you should make sure that what you are angry about was what was done, not really angry at him. And this is really where the problem always begins. Because, example, when somebody insults you, for instance, you're not angry at the insult. You're angry at the person who insulted you. And so you get back at the person and not deal with the issue of the insult. Example.
Right.
So if somebody insults me, instead of saying I'm sorry, but what you meant, I think is not correct. So now you're not attacking him. You're attacking what he was telling you.
What he was saying. Right. Because
what he was saying.
A knee-jerk reaction would be like, say someone said like a really, an insult to you, right?
Yeah.
And you would just come up with an insult back, like, oh, you're, like, oh,
you just say F you.
F you, and then they just, but you did not, then suddenly you're just mad at them in general, but you never addressed the fact of what it was that made you angry in the first place. Like you're just not attacking the person. Like I know, or also like I learned before this term called like, don't like unpack your backpack if you have a problem. Like for example, like in a couple, the wife said, can you take out the trash? And then the husband does not take out the trash. And she asked him again, can you take out the trash? The husband doesn't take out the trash. So then she got mad, right? That the trash did not get taken out. But instead of saying, I got mad because I asked you 3 times to take out the trash, but you didn't take out the trash, what they would say is, you're so useless. You never do anything around the house and you don't ever do any chores. and you don't ever do the dishes, you don't take out the trash, you unpack any kind of problem you've had, and now your problem is personal. It's at the person, and they're like not helping in chores, I guess. But really, what really angered you supposed to be is just that one act. So I read before too that says if there's a problem, and you should handle it like you should only focus on the problem at hand instead of like
and focus on the action, not the actor.
Yes.
Separate it. And when you address it, I have been in many situations. I as chairman of organizations and companies, presiding over meetings almost every week. There are quarrels, there are heated arguments that will come out. So you not only should know how to handle your own anger or manage your own anger, but learn to manage the anger of others too, and how to make them calm in a meeting. So that's part of a skill, I think, that has to be learned, because God said we are called to be peacemakers, not troublemakers.
Yeah.
So when two people are angry, how do we calm them down? But again, the issue of going back to the subject, to the object of the anger instead of the subject, meaning the person, does a lot. Example, in many meetings I preside, when two people are quarreling and they are now hitting at each other, I say, hey, chill. We're talking about this. This is the issue. Can we solve the issue? Forget about your personal stuff. Let's not get personal. Your problem is this, so let's focus on this. Stop about those unnecessary problems. If you're the presiding officer, you must nip it in the bud before it gets blown up.
Really
because
bad.
most of the time, people really forget to differentiate the action from the actor.
Yeah, because the problem is they usually like have been holding other problems, and so then it comes out in a time when they're angry. Basically, we've discussed why it's important to acknowledge and figure out how does anger show up. What is the time? When is it okay to be angry? Or I guess how should we speak and respond to our anger? But how can we hold anger captive? This is really more like a summary question on what we've discussed. And that way we can kind of transition into what's the point? Why do we talk about this covert sin of anger?
Yeah, from my end, I always look at, again, what is the result or what is my objective in being angry? So when it hits you, what is my objective? So if my objective is to correct, will I correct by lashing out and insulting this guy? If my intention is to make him realize that what he did is wrong, will this be the right time to do it, or I do it at some other calm time? So what is my objective? Why I am angry? If my objective is simply self-expression, to just get it out of my chest, that's selfish. You can just go to the punching bag and punch 100 times and think that was the guy that you were angry at, that you have lesser consequences. If that's just your purpose to just get it out of your chest, it's ironic that you get it out of your chest, but you would like it directed at somebody you're angry at. It's not really just getting out of your chest. You want it really the anger from the heart. You want to throw it to his face.
Right.
That's really what you want to do. But you can throw it somewhere else.
Yeah.
And get it out of your chest to God in prayer. You run. Sometimes there are cases I'm really angry. Either I sleep. I have a very crazy thing. I'm like
I actually do the same thing.
I'm like a computer. I sleep, and when I wake up, I'm not angry anymore. It's like reboot in a computer. Or sometimes I run. I jog, I run, and after running, I'm not angry anymore. Or at least I am calmed down. I'm still angry. This is still wrong, but I'll just address it some other time. I'm not okay. In other words, I think that's my contribution there.
Yeah. What do you think, Josh?
I think for me, I love playing golf because you can imagine that person's face, you know, and be able to but seriously, like, you gotta find the outlet to it's different for other people. You gotta find the outlet to really take that anger, that like fleshly anger kind of out somehow.
It's also very hard to stay angry for 4 hours. If you're angry and then you go play a round of golf and you have to like you're really gonna be salty for like 4 straight hours. It's really hard. By the time you're done, you're kind of
well, then for me, I think golf is nice too, because then a lot of like
running for 30 minutes is faster.
I think for me, what's nice about golf is that you can divert your anger. So at first you're angry at somebody, and afterwards you're angry at the game.
Yeah.
Let's just okay, like forget about like you don't care what the other person did, because then you just got like messed up playing golf. But I think the one thing.
By the way, do you think that this ball is the person you're angry at and you hit him hard, really?
Yeah,
Something
that's what he was saying. Like instead of a punching bag.
That's I mean, sometimes if you need to do that, go in the driving range and do that. And just I mean, it's like for me, it's like, or even just like take that, because sometimes a lot of times it's like neurological, so you got to be able to like take it out somehow. That's like working out, that happens a lot, or like sports. That's an outlet a lot when there's like issues at home. If you look at it psychologically, why sports is such a big thing is because people can express creativity and get their anger out at family affairs in the court or in the field. And that's why it's such an amazing thing, because not only teaches them discipline or sportsmanship, a lot of people, great athletes, use it as stress relief and use it as anger relief, on the court. But with that said, not run out of time, but one thing I want to talk about is, when we think about anger and all these things, somebody can ask, what if I'm angry at myself as well? That's a bit more difficult to unpack, because you get how if you're angry with somebody else, okay, you can leave the situation, or like you can do something else. But if you're angry at yourself, you can never leave yourself, or like that's why it's an important conversation, because suicide is a big thing in in life. And like I've heard this statistic, I'm not sure how accurate it is, but it was on a billboard in Dallas, and said that the second leading cause of death in America is suicide. And so that's something that you gotta really watch out for, being angry with yourself, all these things. Especially somebody that's watching. The solution there is to understand, like that was saying, unpack and separate sin and man, even itself. Meaning, like, the way to do it is to essentially think of everybody as a child of God, and think, hey, I'm going to choose to love the person but hate the sin. And so I'm going to like nip sin in the bud, and then like understand, like, hey, I'm gonna separate the two. I'm not gonna intertwine them, even in my. So then, because then for me, for a lot of times, people are angry at themselves, and they begin to mesh the two together and make it seem like it's one. And what that does is that one can feel inferior, one can feel like they're completely separated from God, and they're unworthy to be loved or whatever. That's why they continue to remain angry and have anxiety. But the reality there is, just separate the aspect. Like, God made everybody in his image. Even the most messed up people, he made everybody in his image. You have to understand this aspect of separating the two, even in yourself. That way you can really have some healing in that, and really get rid of the anger that you have for others or for yourself. And just separate. Be angry at the sin that either you are going against, or that somebody's going against at you, and then think about ways to the Bible, or through, I guess, different
like
prayer. Think about those ways to, get rid of that sin. Because that being angry at sin is actually a beautiful thing. Yeah. And so do that in yourself, to understand that, hey, in myself, I'm a child of God, but I still have a fleshly nature. So I'm going to try my life to separate that fleshly nature and starve it, so that all that remains is, what's part of God. So
that's really good, because Dad kept saying separate the action from the actor. That also applies to yourself. You would be the actor and your sin is the action. And so that still applies to you. And although it's hard to think of yourself in the third person, that's kind of what you have to do when you're trying to handle like a sin or something that you're angry at yourself for. But I think this was a really, really good discussion. I'm going to go ahead and close this in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this time together, that we can discuss anger, and that we could understand that it's okay to be angry, but that we just have to watch our timing and our response, and that we should always lean into you to figure out when we should express our anger and how we should express it. Help us keep that action and actor separate, so that we can hate the sin but still love the person, whether that be another person or whether that be ourselves. I pray for anyone listening to this podcast or watching this on YouTube. I pray for their hearts, and I pray for anything that they might be going through. And thank you for this time that we can all discuss this. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.